2 years ago, one man set foot on the moon for the first time, only to discover that it was not indeed the first time that this moon had experienced man feet, as self-proclaimed god Enel had come to the moon seeking a divine realm. But what he found instead was a wasteland of ancient ruins dating back thousands of years before his time. And among them was a message from the ancient moon people explaining why they had to leave their city, where to find them now, and whatever the crap all of these little things are. This is the story of the Lost Moon Kingdom of One Piece. Or at the very least, it is the story of one of the Lost Moon Kingdoms. There's quite a few of them. The One Piece world, as we know it, is actually called planet Blue Star, and as revealed by the O'Hara model of Cosmology, Blue Star has 6 moons orbiting around it in different directions, with one of those moons even having its own adorably named Moon, which is a legit scientific term for the moon of a moon, although I should say that they're only hypothetical in real life. Real-world science has yet to discover a moon, and that is another reason why we shun it and turn instead to fiction. But whenever I bring up the O'Hara model, quite a few people comment that we have no confirmation that this is what the One Piece planet and its immediate cosmic neighborhood look like. That this could just be the theory of the scholars of O'Hara. Which, look, if we were talking about real life, I would say point taken, more proof needed. But we are talking about fictional pirates, and it is more than likely for the sake of conveying information in a story that this is accurate, and we don't just need to rely on this because the multi-moon system has actually been confirmed elsewhere. In chapter 1138, we were gifted with the Elbaf mural, a historical artifact said to have been drawn by a child between 8 and 900 years ago, aka during the Void Century. And this is very difficult to pick up on at first because of all of the other crazy crap happening, but there are at least 3 moons present in this mural. There's the big obvious one between the snake thing and the winged tree snake thing, and just above that moon, nestled betwixt the text boxes, are 2 more moons, with the potential of the rest of the moons being hidden above by the text boxes. So what the scholars of O'Hara modeled was far from a new thought. In fact, a child 800 years ago was able to figure this out. Now, to be fair, that child likely would have been living in an era of highly advanced technologies that we still have yet to catch back up to after the Great War, and in fact, we've also recently discovered evidence of an advanced laboratory on Elbaf from at least 3,000 years ago. At least meaning that it could be much older. This lab is so old that there is no record of it in Elbaf's written history. This lab is legitimately prehistoric. And one of the most insightful things about this planet having 6 moons is that it goes a long way to explaining the extremely erratic weather of the One Piece world, with 6 different gravitational forces all trying to have its way with our poor, submissive, and breedable planet Blue Star. And mate, you've got these 6 moons just gangbanging this planet, wrecking havoc everywhere, which is particularly harshly felt in the Grand Line. And the worst affected area on this planet is, of course, the New World, where any natural disaster can happen at any time. So not only is it a well-established fact that the One Piece world has these 6 direct moons, but pockets of history also remember what those moons may have contained. As in the Elbaf mural, we can also see a ship below the primary moon, which could be one of 2 things. Firstly, this ship could be a depiction of the ancient weapon Uranus, as it does have a lightning strike coming out of it, or it could be a transport vessel from the ancient moon city of Burka. You might recognize that name because it is the name of another location already in the One Piece world, or at least it was. Doesn't exist anymore. Burka was the sky island where Enel was born, and after going through a turbulent and godsome puberty, Enel came to the conclusion that he would destroy his homeland of Burka because no form of humanity belonged in the sky, which he viewed to be the domain of the gods. And this is, well, it's incredibly unfortunate to say the least. There's the obvious loss of life, but what Enel also destroyed here were the very precious voices of the past. A colossal loss to existence as we know it, because the sky island Burka was our primary connection to the lost moon civilization of the same name. And to this day, potentially our only hope of regaining that connection lies in worst generation member Mad Monk Rouge, as he is heavily suspected to be of Burkan origin, and as a former high priest, he likely has insight into the cultural significance of Burka. And funnily enough, we've explored infinitely more of the ancient moon city of Burka than we ever will get to explore the civilization of Burka, the more recent one on the One Piece planet. And this exploration occurred during the Enel's Great Space Operations cover story, where he flew to one of the 6 moons in orbit of the One Piece world. It's very difficult to tell which one it is by drawings alone, but I'm going to guess it's either this one on the top left or this one nestled comfortably into the bottom left, because they look like they have the closest orbits to the planet and therefore would be the most accessible if you were to tie balloons to yourself and float on up into space, which, as far as we've seen, is the most commonly used method of cosmic travel seen in the series to date. And the moon we see in this cover story is very much what you would think of with our moon. Our moon, if it was flooded with mustached automatons and wacky space animals, that is. We'll get to them in a bit, because aliens are very real and a fantastically wild topic in One Piece, including the fact that we've already met many of them, so many aliens. But after a lot of trigger-happy lightning violence, Enel eventually discovered the underground ancient city of Burka, a technological wonderland filled with all sorts of ancient devices, far more advanced than anything we are currently aware of on Blue Star. And most importantly, Enel discovered the Burkan mural, which depicts all 3 sky races: the Burkans, the Skypians, and the Shandorians, which you can tell apart from their distinct wing shapes, which would also imply that these separate tribes used to live in that one city, because in the first part of the mural, it depicts fairly standard day-to-day life with representatives of all 3 tribes working to build and lead their funky automata. And collectively in the mural, they are referred to as a single group, which are the Suki no Hito, literally meaning people of the moon, although Viz translates this as Moonanites because it's adorable, and why not? But with that context, it would be more accurate to think of all of the sky people, minus Lunarians I suppose, as the same group with regional differences. Sort of like how people from certain parts of Victoria pronounce mall as mal, whereas everywhere else in Australia says it correctly. And from here, my question was going to be, what caused these groups to separate and start their own individual civilizations on planet Blue Star? But look, if it's anything like this mal business, then I completely understand. But let's talk about why this mural was made first, as it actually appears to be one of, if not the final work of the Moonanites, and it appears to be a message left to anyone who was to discover this city later on, as it quite blatantly states that the reason for departing the moon was a lack of resources. The city of Burka was getting to the point where it could no longer sustain life. And fair enough, because the moon does appear to be nigh on completely barren in Enel's cover story, but it was likely once a far more lush and vivacious place to live. One theory we currently have is that Burka doomed itself by engaging in relentless industrialization that destroyed the living conditions of the moon, and we can even see a depiction of a similar process in the Elbaf mural. On the right side, a highly advanced city is pictured with all sorts of gears and smog, and there's a production line of people constantly fueling the city with an unknown power source, and whatever that source is, if it were to run out, then the city would cease to function. What's being pictured in the Elbaf mural could very well be happening on one of the moons of One Piece. We are not certain that it's happening on Blue Star. And this power source has been hypothesized to be the Mother Flame, an everlasting and infinite source of energy. And the Burka mural does show us a spherical container with what could be a Mother Flame, but even if not, with what is almost certainly whatever powered the city. And in fact, Enel ends up finding this sphere and powering it with his own electricity, bringing Burka back to life for the first time in over a millennia. It could be that the city was originally powered by the Mother Flame, but something happened, an accident or some sort of sabotage, and the Mother Flame was lost. And unfortunately, there was nothing that the Moonanites could use to replace it with, thus dooming their civilization. Which is why in the part of the Burka mural where we see the 3 sky tribes making their descent to Blue Star, it is a very tearsome goodbye. The sky folk clearly do not want to leave Burka, and a nice little touch is that we also have tears from the automata that the Moonanites left behind. One of the initial questions I asked was, why not take the automata with them? But the answer is probably because they had nothing to power them with. And also take very special notes that the Moonanites seem to have traveled through space and down to the planet Blue Star by using balloons. So contrary to popular belief, and even one theory that I've already stated in this video, the Moonanites were very unlikely to have taken a ship to Blue Star. Once again, because they likely had no way of powering such a vessel, even if one did already exist, so they had to use what they had on hand, and I guess what they had on hand were balloons. And you know what, to their credit, they worked. But I believe this could also give us the answer as to how this one society ended up fragmenting into at least 3. Because balloons are not traditionally the most most reliable of vehicles, and so it would have been quite the miracle if everyone had ended up on the same island, but the ancient Moonanites appear to have been separated in transit, with two groups managing to settle on Sky Islands, with nations that would become Burka and Skypiea, and one group of Moonanites who were unable to find a Sky Island and instead had to float all the way down to the Blue Sea, which is the settlement that would become Shandora, although today it's either known as Jaya or Upper Yard, depending on which half it is we're talking about, which really adds quite a bitter twist to the war in the sky that lasted 400 years. This was the conflict between the Shandorians who were shot up into the sky and the Skypieans who immediately tried to claim their land. These two groups, who spent 400 years at war with one another, were once part of the same civilization, where they joined hands to create some of the most advanced technology we've seen in all of the histories. But enough time had passed on Blue Star for both factions to have forgotten their common origin. I mean, either forgotten or it was erased, as the timeline for descent from the moon to Blue Star is estimated to be approximately 1,100 years ago, because that is the earliest record that Nico Robin was able to find within Shandora's ruins. However, it could be much older, because Robin reads that 1,100 years ago is when the city thrived, not necessarily when it was founded. And Robin, of course, was not the only person to take a keen interest in these ruins, as Enel also put on a surprisingly academic hat and he set out to study Shandora, which is where he learned about the legend of Endless Vars, or Endless Verth, depending on the translation, although in Furigana it's also called Fairy Verth, which may be very relevant. Either way, Enel, he read this history and he set his sights on finding this Endless Verth, but the irony being that he was already there. The Endless Verth being referred to in Shandorian history was almost certainly written from the perspective of those who settled from the moon. Planet Blue Star itself was their Endless Verth, a paradise they set out to find where life could be sustained infinitely. However, Enel made the understandable mistake of believing that the Shandorians were native to the planet Blue Star and that the Endless Verth referred to somewhere else. So there's a lot going on here. Firstly, I think it's kind of funny that Enel went out of his way to find the lands that his ancestors abandoned. When he went up to the moon, he found the exact opposite of what he was looking for. And secondly, it adds a nice layer of historical irony to the entire Skypiea saga, because Enel was going to destroy Upper Yard, which was the Verth that his ancestors valued so highly and migrated from the moon to get to. And the reason for this is because Enel saw Upper Yard's existence as an affront to nature, that humans did not belong in the domain of the sky. And you know what? In a way, he was right, because no one, not the Shandorians, the Skypieans, or the Burkans, were natives to the sky. They all came from much higher above. And in the case of the Shandorians, they came from higher above, and then they went to lower above, and then they went to about the middle of the sky. But what Enel failed to see was the value of the land, the value of the Vars. He couldn't see it as anything special, certainly not divine, because it's just a big clump of dirt. But that clump of dirt brought hope and life to a civilization that had once lost both. Now, going back to the moon, we do need to talk about the Automata, because their existence significantly complicates our understanding of the moon city. And that's because it would appear that there were more than 3 settlements that came from Burka. It's not just the Burkans, the Skypieans, and the Shandorians. From here, this is all my conjecture, but Karakuri Island, also known as the future land Baltimore, likely has its origins entwined with the moon as well, because this is the island that some of the Automata on the moon came from. This is more commonly known as the birthplace of Dr. Vegapunk. However, another resident of the island named Dr. Tsukimi, who even contains the word moon in his name, Suki means moon, Dr. Tsukimi was seen either building or restoring 4 Automata named Spacey, Cosmo, Galaxy, and Macro, and after Dr. Tsukimi chokes on a dumpling after seeing an explosion on the moon, this ragtag group of Automata ride balloons all the way up to the moon to take vengeance on those responsible for Dr. Tsukimi's death, which, to be clear, his death was an unfortunate dumpling-related accident. But eventually, with the help of Enel, they discover a legion of dormant Automata who look exactly like them, meaning that one of 2 things has occurred. Either Spacey, Macro, Galaxy, and Comrade Cosmo were Automata who were brought down to Blue Star by a faction of Moonanites who favored preserving and pursuing technology, or they were built natively on Karakuri Island by Dr. Tsukimi, who found the ancient plans of those who settled on the island, which I think explains why Karakuri Island lives so far into the future compared to every other island in the Grand Line, because they inherited so much technology and knowledge of their past moon ancestors. And this even raises the possibility that Dr. Vegapunk may be a descendant of the ancient moon city of Burka, which may also explain his technological technological genius and his own personal inherited will, as well as his tendency to create peaceful, mundane inventions like bubble tech, cloud tech, and flower tech to go along with our existing balloon tech. And just before we move away from balloons, there is a very important location in One Piece that often gets overlooked. A lot of people don't even know this exists. But this location is called the Balloon Terminal. And this is a sky island that is supported entirely by balloons, which we now know are ancient Moonanite moon tech. And this is the island that Kaido jumped off to attack Eustace Kid and friends of Eustace Kid. And one not friend. Scratchman Apu was not a friend. But this also goes on to show us that there may have even been a fifth settlement. They may have been a group of Moonanites who couldn't find a natural sky island to settle on. And so what they did is they created an artificial sky island with the balloons left over from their voyage. But even with all of this knowledge, we have only covered one moon. There's still 5 more and a moon out there, each of which could be housing or having previously housed its own civilization. And we have seen at least one other confirmed race in the Space Pirates. These are the main antagonists in Enel's cover story, and they appear to be mostly made up of creatures that almost resemble minks and may very well have a common ancestry with them. And we're not 100% sure what they're doing in the ancient city of Burka, but it appears to be an attempt at mining and excavating. And I imagine that this is because their civilization is now facing a similar crisis to what Burka went through over 1,100 years ago, where their moon has exhausted its resources and they are now on the hunt for anything they can find on neighboring moons. And ultimately, the solution of the Space Pirates may also be to travel to Blue Star, because at the very least, there's absolutely nothing for them on Burka. And as for other aliens, you do need to look pretty hard for this, but Mr. Panda Man has run into quite a few in his hidden serialized adventures, particularly those on the back of covers of volumes. Now, this is a bit of a foreign concept to us because in Japanese, the manga volumes come with these funky dust covers. And when you take those dust covers off and look on the back, you can usually see a Panda Man story playing out, such as the back cover of volume 45, where he is seen firing a panda beam at a snake, or more importantly, on the back of volume 54, where a jellyfish-like alien named Unkekun beams down from a UFO and greets Panda Man, whilst Panda Man is being chased by another alien named Domokun, both of whom are from Eiichiro Oda's one-shot manga God's Gift for the Future, which was published 4 years prior to One Piece, and both of whom proving to us that space travel is possible without balloons. Curious. But Panda Man goes on to encounter many other creatures which I would describe as, not quite of this world, such as the dark floating sunhead that tries to eat Panda Man, and there's also this crazy kind of starbug guy, giving us plenty of options for whoever may have lived on all of those other moons, all of which eventually seem to have migrated to planet Blue Star and are currently living inconspicuously amongst the planet natives.